Hello everyone. In this lesson we're going to set up the user profile screen. This should be fun because that screen shows a list of all blog posts that user has created. Let's jump into the action. So for example, once you're logged in the future this will be your avatar. It won't be hard-coded to a picture of a cat, but when you click on this, it should take you to your user profile screen. Now that screen should look something like this. So this is just from that HTML templates folder that we've been borrowing code from. So your profile will look something like this, and the screen that it starts out on shows you the blog posts that you've created. So the idea is we want this to come to life. We want this to actually pull from the database and show your blog posts for the current user. So this is the static HTML template, but let's go back to our actual application. And let's begin by setting up the route pattern and then actually making this link point in the right direction. So what I would do first is go into my routes file, so web.php in the routes folder. Down at the bottom, why don't we say a comment and say profile related routes, and then let's just spell out a route. So route : call the get method, semicolon. The pattern in the quotes here would be /profile/ and then just to prove a point, in these curly brackets, to do something dynamic, let's say pizza. Eventually, this will be user or username, right? But just to avoid confusion and so things don't feel mysterious and magical and you're not sure why they're working or lining up, I think naming this pizza will make it abundantly clear how and why things are lining up, right? It doesn't need to match the name of our model or the name of our controller or anything like that. The idea is that this part of the URL will be dynamic, right? It'll be Brad or barks a lot. So that's the first argument, comma. The second argument would just be a function that we want to run. So an array, square brackets. Now you could create a separate controller called profile controller. That would make sense. But I'm just going to go ahead and keep the functions for profiles in the user controller. It's just personal preference. So user controller, : class, comma, and let's just have a name, a function of, how about just simply profile. So let's save this file and then jump into your user controller. And let's just set up a new function. So public function, let's name it profile, parentheses, curly brackets. We know that we want to return a view. Now we haven't created the view yet, but let's say return view, semicolon, and imagine we're just going to name it profile-posts. So give that a save, and now let's go create a new file in our resources and then in our views folder. So I'm going to right click on views, new file, name it profile-posts.blade.php. In this file, let's give it an x-layout sandwich, so a matching closing tag. In the middle of the sandwich, this is where our borrowed HTML template would go. So remember our HTML templates folder. In this text editor, that's where I'm borrowing code from. So you would just go into profile-posts.html, find where the header ends. So around line 30, the header ends. So this code that starts on line 32, I would begin selecting there. Scroll all the way down to about line 61, right before the footer begins. Copy that into your clipboard. Within x-layout, just paste it in. Let's give that a save. And now, in the address bar, you can visit, /profile/ and then just make up any string. Cool. So now, let's set things up. Let me go back to the home page. Let's set things up so that this link in the header, whatever account you're logged in with, it should point towards /profile and then / your actual dynamic username in session, right? To take you to your own profile URL. So to do that, in VS Code, I would just open up, so controller command P, our layout blade.php file. And it would be around line 24. We see this A element here. You can see it has an image, the title of my profile. So instead of the href being a hashtag, it would be, /profile/ and then this part would be dynamic. So I would have double curly brackets. This would just be the logged in username. So whoever's logged in. So I would call the auth function. I would look inside that and call the user function. And then I would look inside that for the username property. Give that a save. And now if I refresh, if I hover over this avatar, you can see in the bottom left corner, perfect. That would take me to /profile/Brad. So if I click on that, awesome. Now, this is completely hard-coded. So now let's bring this to life. In this lesson, let's just work on having this username value be dynamic, right? So instead of being hard-coded to Brad, and then let's especially make this list of blog posts actually pull from our database for this user. So the correct question for us to be asking is to jump into our user controller, and essentially within this profile function, how can we access, the user in the database and their blog posts in the database? Well, the answer has to do with what our router is going to be passing into this function. So remember back in our routes file, we named the variable pizza, right? That's going to be the incoming username, like Brad or Barks a lot. So back in user controller, for example, if we just said, $unicorn, well, then we could access that, and for this profile it would be Brad or Barks a lot, but it would literally just be a simple string of text. We don't want it to be just a string of text. We want it to be an instance of the user model, right? That full metaphor of what a user is. Any relationships it has, the data from the database, not just a string of text. So in other words, here's what we want to do. For this incoming parameter, we want to use type hinting. So for the parameter, we want to say uppercase user, right? Build out the metaphor of what a user is based on this incoming username. Now remember, if you want Laravel and the power of models to perform the database lookup for you, you need to match whatever you named the parameter variable in your route. So because we named it pizza in our routes file, this would need to be, user and then $pizza. Also, one other quick detail. When Laravel is going to look up something in the database for you, like this, by default, it's going to try to look it up based on its ID number. However, we're not giving it an ID number, right? This is going to be / and then Brad or Barks a lot. So what you want to do is the variable name and then colon, and then the name or the column in the database that you're going to be looking it up based upon. So in other words, sort of the implied default would be, right, look it up based on its ID, but we want it to be looked up based on its incoming username. Cool. So we can save that, and then back in our user controller, we're not actually going to leave it named pizza, but just for now, the idea is that within the body of our function, $pizza is now a fully built out instance of a user model. So let's start simple. Let's just start by making the username dynamic. So when we're rendering our blade template, let's say comma, you give it another argument, so an array, and let's give it a property of username, and then set that to equal, so this equal greater than symbol, and then it would just be $pizza, look inside it for the username property, right? So in just a minute, we'll change this from pizza to user, but the idea is we're looking in our user object, our instance of a user model, we're looking inside it for username. So then in our profile posts blade up at the top here, on line number 4, we don't want this hard-coded to Brad. We would want this to be, double curly brackets, $username. Let's go ahead and save that, and if you refresh, well, you should now see your actual username. Because it was hard-coded to Brad, I can't actually see. I've already registered a secondary account called Barksalot. So for example, I could go up into the address bar and visit profile/Barksalot. Cool, just to prove the point that that's working. Now, let's get to the actually interesting part. Let's query for any and all blog posts for this user. So let me go back to Brad because Brad actually has blog posts in the database. Okay, but in order to query for any blog posts from this user, right, within our profile function here, we first need to spell out the relationship between a user and blog posts from the angle of a user. Let me explain what I mean. So if you go into your app folder and then the models folder, jump into post.php. Remember down at the bottom, we already defined the relationship from the perspective of a blog post, right? We said that a blog post belongs to a user, but now we need to go into our user model and define the relationship from the other direction. So check this out. Go into your user model file and maybe down at the very bottom, so within this closing curly bracket, but maybe below all of this other code. So right about here, I would just say, public function, and you could name it anything. There's nothing special about this name, but let's name it posts, parentheses, curly brackets. And now we're just going to say that a user, right, that's the model we're in, a user has many posts. So we're just spelling out the relationship so Laravel knows what to look for in the database. So we're just going to return and then $this to represent this class. Look inside it, call a method of has many, semicolon. In these parentheses, we give it two things. The first thing we give it is the post class. So uppercase post, colon, colon, class. The second thing we give it is the column name in the database that's powering this relationship. So remember, again, on our posts table, it has a column of user underscore ID. So now this is super cool. If we save this, you can go back into your user controller. And now just for me, when I first learned Laravel, this right here, this was the aha moment. This was when everything started to click and make sense. So now we know that in this function, pizza is an instance of a user model. And in our user model, we just added a function called posts. So now watch how easy it is to load the blog post by this user. Let's make up a variable name just so we don't have to spell anything out in this array that we're passing into our Blade template. But right about here, I would just say, $the posts. I'm just making this up. But let's say that equals, and then it's just pizza. Look inside it and call the posts method. And then at the very end of that, call the get method. And then just so we can visualize what this is going to return, on the next line, we could just say return, $the posts. I just want us to be able to see in the browser what it's going to return. Or you actually could literally just say, return this. But if we save that and you refresh this URL, well, Chrome doesn't make it very easy to read, but if you opened up that same URL in Firefox, you can see it's just a JSON payload with 4 or 5 different blog posts, because I have, if you look in the database, 5 blog posts by the Brad user. So now you would just want to loop through this array to display that on the front end. Anyways, the idea here is that pizza is an instance of the user model, so you can access anything you would want to about the user. You can look inside it for its username, but now because we defined that function in the model, we named it posts as a relationship, it's this easy to query for the posts by that author. So let's do this. We can actually spell it out on all one line. We don't even need this line anymore. In this array that we're passing into our Blade template, let's just add another property, so comma, and let's call it, posts, and then equals greater than, and it would literally just be pizza, look inside that, for posts, look inside that, and let's actually order it so the newest ones are on top. So we can just call the latest method, and then finally call the get method. Let's go ahead and save that, and now the idea is in our Blade template, we just want to loop through the array of posts. So check this out. Go into your profile post.blade, and down around line number 17, we see list group. So the idea is there's 3 hard-coded blog posts. Just leave one and delete the other 2, and we're just going to use that as a template and actually loop through it for however many posts there are. So in other words, I would just take this A element and copy that into your clipboard, and then inside the div with a class of list group, let's do this. Let's say @ for each, parentheses, and then we're trying to loop through the variable of posts as, and then you get to make up a name for a singular instance. Let's just call it, post. And then on the next line, let's end the for each loop. So end for each. In between, we can write HTML. So just paste back in your clipboard, and let's start simple. Let's start with the title for each blog post. So we would remove this hard-coded example number 1, say double curly brackets, and it would just be the singular instance of what we're looping through. So $post, and look inside that for the title. If we save that and refresh, awesome. The Brad user has created 5 blog posts. We have 5 instances of that formatting using the real title. So now let's just spell out the real posted on date. So back in our code, we don't want this hard-coded date value. It would just be, double curly brackets, singular post, look inside it for the created at, and then call format. And quotes, we just want, the 2-digit day or the 2-digit month, and then the 2-digit day of the month, and then the 4-digit year. So we can save that. If you refresh, awesome. Now let's make the links actually clickable. So let's focus on their href value for each one. So back in our template, on the A element, you can ignore this href value. This was actually for a JavaScript Node.js course that I've built, but we would want the href value to be /post/ and then, a blog post is going to have an ID of simply 1, 2, 3. So to make that dynamic, double curly brackets, and then just $post, look inside it for ID. If we give that a save, you can refresh. And now if I click on, I named this my newest test, perfect. I can go back, click on quick test post. You get the idea. Awesome. At this point, let's make this post count number come to life, right? So 3 is hard coded, but I actually have, it looks like 5 total blog posts. You might have a different number. But to make this come to life, here's all we would do. Just go back into our user controller and check this out. We're building this associative array, right, that we're passing into our Blade template. So after get, we just say comma. Let's spell out another property. Let's make up a label for this item. We'll call it, how about post count? And then set that to equal. And then we just say our $pizza, look inside that for posts, call that. And then there is a method, so look inside that for count. You can save that, and then back in our Blade template, on line number 12, instead of post being hard-coded to 3, this would be double curly bracket, $post count. And give that a save, you refresh. Awesome. You should see your dynamic number here of however many blog posts the user you're viewing has created. Cool. Now for our final detail in this lesson, let's set it up so we're not actually using the bizarre word of pizza. So I would just go back into your routes file, right? Web.php. We don't actually want this to be named pizza. We would want it to be named user, just so it makes sense. You can save that. Go into your user controller, and this variable name instead of pizza would be $user, and then just replace that throughout this entire function, right? Anywhere that you see $pizza, it should be $user. So here as well. Cool. So the idea is it doesn't need to be named user, but that is what would make sense. Let's go ahead and save that. We're still in business. Perfect. Now, where do we go from here? Well, in our next lesson, if you view an individual blog post, we're going to set up these update or edit and delete buttons, right? So that if you're the owner of a post, you can update or delete it. If you're not the owner of a post, we don't even want these buttons to appear, and you definitely should not have permission to, actually edit or delete someone else's post. It should be a fun feature to set up, so let's keep our momentum rolling, and I will see you in the next lesson.